Okay, welcome everybody. This is our 5785 fall course, our Livnos College for Women course on marriage. The course is going to be based on a couple of books, several books. Two of them I wrote. One is a book called Setting a Table for Two, and one is a book called Marital Intimacy. So I wrote those books a long time ago. I have over the decades revised them, updated them, expanded them. We're also going to be using a sefer called the Mishkan Yisrael. This is easily the most beautiful sefer I've ever read in my life. It is magnificent. It is ostensibly, there are two parts to the book. The first part of the sefer, I've never read. I believe it was translated some years ago and has become known as something like the Ohel Leah, the Ohel Rachel, something like that. I don't know. I've never read it. The part that I read was the second half, which is based, that's really the book. The first part is an intro to the second. And if you look on the cover, it says Mishkan Yisrael Al Tur Orachaim Siman Reish Mem. And it is the sefer that motivated me to write the book Marital Intimacy. We'll talk more about that at the appropriate time in this course. Even if you were to have those Sfarim, I'm pretty confident that in this course, I'm going to give you a little more. I'm going to give you the Torah Shabbal Peh that would go along with that. And I think that will be clear as the weeks go on, Emir Hashem. Okay. By way of an introduction, this is my favorite. If you invite me to a wedding or to an ufruv or to Sheva Brachos, to anything. So if someone asks me to speak, I give this Devar Torah. I think it's really the most beautiful idea. Most beautiful idea you could come across. And it goes something like this. In the course, we're going to be talking about marriage. That's the title of the course, marriage. So marriage covers a lot of aspects. There are a lot of dimensions to marriage. There is all the kind of interpersonal dynamics. There is a problem-solving communication, all those kinds of things. And there's an aspect as well, excuse me. There's an aspect of the physical, the sexual relationship, that dimension within marriage. All of these things are covered by the Torah. The Torah discusses all of them freely, openly, with dignity, with respect, the way we would expect the Torah to do that. And in this course, we're going to touch on some of these kinds of topics. We too are going to ensure that throughout we discuss them with dignity, with respect, as adults, as Torah Jews, recognizing that, and we'll see this as the course goes on, that real Kedusha, the ultimate Kedusha of life, is anchored just in those kinds of aspects of the world, of the physical world, of the human experience, that the rest of it, the non-Torah world, Nebuch, the Goyim out there, that they dismiss as being undignified, the opposite of holiness. It's specifically there that we identify holiness. So I hope you'll see, and please don't be nervous. You'll see early on, very, very early on, very quickly, that as we discuss any topic, it's done with a tremendous amount of dignity and reserve, as is befitting Torah Jews, given the fact that I am a man and the people who are attending the course are women. With all of that, I believe that we can still behave according to the highest levels of dignity and of Kedusha, as is appropriate for Torah Jews. So there are 613 mitzvos in the Torah, Taryag, if you're curious about that. So I know somebody on the Livnos faculty who gives a great course on that topic. There are Taryag, 613 Torah mitzvos of Torah, that fit into that category. There are other derisas that come out. The Moni HaMitzvos identify different ways of counting those 613. Interestingly enough, One of those 613, I'll use the formulation of the Stipler Gaon Zatzal. I had the Zechus when I was young. I saw him. I was in the same room with him. I never spoke with him, but I was in the same room. I was a few feet away and I saw him. The Stipler, in a famous letter, he wrote a series of letters. They date back to the late 1960s. They are recorded. There is a sefer actually that came out containing those letters. In my book, Marital Intimacy, I translate parts of them. But the Stipler, his formulation, he says this. He says, the mitzvah of Ona is a positive mitzvah. Now, there is a discussion amongst the Mefarshim, amongst the poskim. Everybody agrees that there is a mitzvah of Torah strength, of Torah authority. There is a mitzvah aseh, or it's an aseh that comes from a lav. It can be categorized different ways, but in any event, there is a doraisa, there's a mitzvah doraisa on a husband to satisfy his wife's needs for physical intimacy. That is a mitzvah of the Torah. It's an amazing thing when you think about it. It's formulated specifically, it is formulated on a husband, and there's no reciprocal mitzvah on a wife, not formulated, not categorized that way. It's not legislated specifically on a wife, but on a husband, there is a mitzvah on a husband to satisfy his wife's needs, her desires for physical intimacy. The Stipler formulates it. The Stipler writes in his letter, he says that the mitzvah of Ona, that's what the mitzvah is called, the mitzvah of Ona. Literally, it means time. But the mitzvah of Ona is a mitzvah taseh. He said, it's no different than the positive mitzvah to eat matzah on the first night of the Seder. The mitzvah to eat matzah on the first night of the Seder is clearly a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's a positive Torah commandment. It's a popular one. We love it. We sit at our sidarim and we eat huge quantities of matzah to make sure that we fulfill. We eat it as fast as we can to make sure that we've satisfied that Torah commandment. The Stipler chose, it would be worth asking ourselves, that's going to be another part of the course, to ask why did the Stipler choose to compare it to the mitzvah aseh of eating matzah. That's for another time. What I wanted to establish here is that according to everybody, the mitzvah, there is a positive mitzvah, mitzvat aseh, on a husband to satisfy his wife's needs and her desires for physical intimacy. And that is discussed within the halachic literature, that the Sefer Mishkan Yisrael, that second half, which deals with the Tur, the halachic compendium, the distillation of all the various views of the Rishonim on the Gemara. So the Tur, in his section Orach Chaim, chapter 240, he discusses exactly this mitzvah of, mitzvat Ona. So the Mefarshim ask this question. We have, the question is, why is there no bracha? Why is there no bracha formulated? We know that before the performance of many mitzvot, we recite a bracha. In the morning, when I put on tefillin, so I make the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahaniach tefillin. I put the arm tefillin on, and then I put the head tefillin, and I say, al mitzvat tefillin. Before we just took the lulav and the etrog. Before we do that, we make a bracha. The bracha is al nitilat lulav. We do that, we recite brachot before all kinds of mitzvot. That's the system that we have. We have brachot formulated not just for the performance of mitzvot, but for all kinds of other things, all kinds of other experiences in the world. But the question that the halachic authorities ask is this. They say, why is it that there's no mitzvah, that there's no bracha recited before the performance? Why doesn't a husband say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mitzvat ona? or whatever. All right. Thank you. You sanctified us. You commanded us to perform the mitzvah of Ona, or to, however it would be formulated. I'm not sure. there are a few different possibilities that the commentators entertain. But the question is, why isn't there a bracha specifically formulated for for a husband to recite before performing this positive mitzvah of the Torah? So the commentators there are a few different schools of thought. Most of them say like this: they try to identify this activity, the mitzvah of Ona, and they try to identify the non-recitation of a bracha before its performance. They try to identify to compare it to other mitzvot. If you think about it, there are a whole bunch of other mitzvot before which we recite no bracha. So, for example, if you look, a famous analysis by the Rashba, one of the medieval commentators, he's one of the Rishonim. So the Rashba goes through a number of factors that go into when a person makes a bracha before performing a mitzvah and when a person does not. Because if you think about it, there are a whole host of mitzvot before which we recite no bracha. We say no bracha at all. So, for example, before we give tzedakah, or a person knocks on the door or approaches us and says, "Would you give me tzedakah, please?" So we don't stop and make a bracha. We don't say, "Oh, hold on a second. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot havitzivanu al nitinat tzedakah." Right? We don't say anything like that. Before we go to visit a sick person, right? We show up someone in their house, they're in the hospital. We don't say, "Oh, 1 second, before I walk in, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot havitzivanu al bikur chol." We don't do anything like that. So the Rashba and many other halachic commentaries over the last 800 years, so they come up with various kinds of considerations, factors, disqualifications, as it were, to explain why we wouldn't do that. So, for example, anytime there is a mitzvah whose successful performance depends not just on me, but on somebody else. Not just on me, but on somebody else. In that case, I don't make a bracha, because the halachic consideration, these authorities say, Chazal, when they were formulating brachot before mitzvot, they said this: we don't want someone to recite a bracha for naught. The person will say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam. They'll invoke Shemu Malchut. They'll invoke Hashem's name. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, who commanded us, who sanctified us with the mitzvot and commanded us to do X, whatever that is. And if that activity X depends on the participation of somebody else, on somebody else's cooperation, and they decide at that moment to withhold it, then I'm stuck. I've recited Hashem's name. I've made a bracha, levatala, in vain. So in that case, the Rashba and others explain, Chazal formulated no bracha. So if you look through the many mitzvot before which we recite no bracha, the authorities claim, you'll see that if any mitzvah involves another person, is a function of another person's cooperation, forget about it. No bracha is recited. Similarly, there is another kind of halachic consideration. If ein la shiur, if there's no upper limit, if there's no real quantification, if there's no way to quantify, to describe in exact terms what the mitzvah requires, no bracha is recited. Maybe this little amount, or maybe this huge amount, what in fact represents the accurate, the positive, the appropriate fulfillment of the mitzvah. If you can't articulate, if you can't give it some kind of detail, some kind of numbers associated with, then no bracha is recited. There are a whole bunch of these kinds of halachic factors. There are others, for example, that have been suggested in more by the Achronim, not by the Rishonim. I don't know, for example, I'll give you one particular consideration. I don't remember seeing it in the writings of the Rishonim. It comes up in the Achronim. And they say like this. They say, again, so just to illustrate what I mentioned to you a minute ago, let's suppose that someone, right, I show up at someone's door, they're not feeling well, and I say, well, I'm going to visit this person. I knock on the door, knock, 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 and then I say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, and I recite the bracha al mitzvat bikur cholim, and as I say that, the person looks out through the shades and says, don't visit. I don't feel up to it today. I don't feel up to it today. I'm not up to seeing visitors. Don't come inside. I've recited a bracha with Shem and Malchut. I made a bracha livatala. And nothing came of it, because the performance of my mitzvah was a function of another person's cooperation. So you can understand just viscerally, intuitively, why it is that when the Mefarshim say, in those kind of cases, Chazal didn't legislate, they didn't formulate any bracha. Okay, makes perfect sense to us. There's another consideration, which I said belongs to more modern times, which is the Achronim say that if you have some kind of a situation in which the performance of the mitzvah is going to be, or let's say not the performance of the mitzvah so much as the recitation of the bracha is going to be demeaning or humiliating to the person who is the recipient, the object of the performance of this mitzvah, in that case, we don't legislate, we don't formulate a bracha. So for example, I've told this story in other Livnos classes, other Livnos courses. So for those of you who have been to my courses before, if you heard this, I apologize. But I knew of a fellow who was in upstate New York. He was a Jewish fellow, an observant fellow, and he was in the hospital. He was in a hospital for some kind of procedure. It caught him a little bit off guard. He was, I think, on a business trip or maybe on vacation. I don't remember the exact date. I think it was vacation. And something happened. He ended up in the hospital. He ended up in the hospital for a few days. So while he was there, somebody showed up, another observant fellow, another man, knocked on the door, and he said, "Oh, I'm here, and I wanted to visit you." So I looked over. He saw a man walk in. He was wearing a yarmulke, a black velvet yarmulke, and a guy was in. And he said, "Oh, you're coming to visit? Thank you so much. Like, how did you?" So the guy said, "Well, I was here on business. I have a contract I was delivering paper goods, plastic cups, whatever it was. I don't know what he was delivering. Paper supplies. I don't remember. The guy who had been in the hospital was the one who told me the story. So he said, I was delivering some materials. This is I have a contract with a number of the hospitals in the area, and I was delivering supplies. That's his business, and he was, that's his parnasa. So he said, while I was here, I said to the reception, I said, "Are there any Jewish patients?" I thought to myself, look, let me hop around a few mitzvos, and I'll get the credit for some things, and the day won't be like a total loss. I will have driven up, from the city all these hours, and besides the parnasa, I'll hop around. I'll pick up a few mitzvahs. So the guy who was in the hospital bed, who had been the patient, said to me, I felt very disrespected. It was a very demeaning thing. The way it could have been formulated was, I was here. I thought, oh, a fellow Jew, maybe and he said, the fact that I see like a frum person, it gave me such happiness. He said, but what I realized was at that moment that I was a prop. I was a prop, a mitzvah prop. He said, I was no different than an esrog. A person picks up an esrog, uses it for a bracha, puts it aside. He says, doesn't feel particularly concerned, doesn't have any kind of warm feelings or affection or connection with the esrog. He said, that's what I felt like. And that's what the Mefarshim suggest. Some of the Achronim propose that if a person, let's go back to our example of the sick person or the person who is about to receive, the poor person, and as I reach out to give the person a dollar, I say, oh, wait, stop 1 second. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netinat tzedakah. If I were to do that, excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. If I were to do that, it's demeaning to the person, because whereas a moment ago, they might have thought, right, in the absence of the bracha, as I reached out and I gave him a couple of dollars, he would think to himself, this Jew cares about me, a fellow Jew. We're connected together. We're part of a community. We're part of a family. There's a warmth here. But if I were to spoil the moment by saying, oh, wait, hold on just 1 second. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech. So the person becomes reduced to the level of a prop. They're a mitzvah prop, nothing more than that. They're an esrog for me, no more. So because of that, the halachic commentators propose no mitzvah was formulated before all of the interpersonal kind of mitzvot that we perform in the course of our lives. So in that sense, with all of those kind of considerations, all those factors that I've mentioned, so there are some commentators, when they're confronted with this question, why is there no bracha before the performance of the mitzvah of ona, before a husband performs the mitzvah of ona, before he's careful to take care of his wife's needs for physical intimacy, why is there no bracha? Well, all of those factors that we discussed, I mentioned 2 or 3. There are about half a dozen, and all of them would be appropriate. They'd all apply here. But just the ones that we considered, the idea that there's no shear, there's no upper limit, or there's no way to really quantify what does the mitzvah require. There are certain minimal details, but in terms of, what would be the upper limit, the upper threshold, there's no way of identifying that. So, okay, that makes sense. The idea of the performance of a mitzvah being dependent on the cooperation of another human being. So you could see how that would make perfect sense. If a husband were to recite that bracha, and the wife were to say, I'm not interested at this moment. I don't want you to perform that mitzvah. I'm not interested in being involved in the performance of the mitzvah of ona. So then, there's the fear of the bracha levatala. The idea, of course, of objectifying a spouse. If a husband were to say, okay, wow, we're going to be intimate, and the wife might think to herself, my husband cares about me. He's attracted to me. He loves me. He's being drawn. Every natural instinct that he possesses in the depths of his soul, in his being, the totality of himself, all of that is coming into play, and he's giving expression because of his desire, his love for me, his concern for me, would be shattered at that moment. If a husband were to say, oh, Liebchen, hold on just 1 second. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech. She would say, what? Oh, I understand. I'm an esrog for you. So because of that, the halachic commentators explain, they say, well, you know what? No bracha is recited before this Torah strength, positive mitzvah of mitzvat ona. That's what the commentators propose. The Chassam Sofer, he has another way of looking at this. And this entire course, all my books, everything I've ever taught, everything I've ever said about marriage is based on this answer of the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer says, I reject the premise of the question. You're saying this, you're saying that there's no bracha recited before the performance of the mitzvah of ona. Chassam Sofer says, if I'm understanding the premise of your question correctly, that's what you're saying. You're looking to account for why. Why is there no bracha? He says, but I don't understand what you're saying. Everything you're saying, it makes no sense to me. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Why does it make no sense to the Chassam Sofer? He says, because in point of fact, there is a bracha. There is a bracha. We recite a bracha before intimacy. Of course we do. He says, in fact, we recite a whole bunch of them. We recite 7 of them. If you look, perhaps we recite 9. If you look at the brachot, the 2 that have to do with erusin, with kedushin, the first 2, when you look at the standard, the chuppah, has 2 parts to it. There's the creation of the bond of erusin. It has 2 brachot. If you look at this, the first one is borei pragafen. If you look at the second one, it is specifically dealing with the topic of intimacy. Then we read the ketubah, we do something to break up. So maybe we'll forget about those brachot. But the 7 after, many of them explicitly allude to aspects of intimacy, of physical intimacy between husband and wife. They have to do with the creation of a human being and the way that we human beings in partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu create more human beings, is through this mechanism of intimacy. So Chassam Sofer says there isn't just one bracha before intimacy, there are 7 of them, the Sheva brachot. He says we recite the Sheva brachot, and then later on, there's just a little bit of time. We have to, people have to eat those little pastries, the triangular pastries with the mushroom sauce on top, and they have to do that interminable first dance that lasts for about 10 hours. But when all of that finishes, the couple are intimate that evening. So of course there's a bracha before. To which people respond and say, okay, fine, but what about the rest of life? So the Chassam Sofer says, I don't understand what you're saying. He says right? There are other, and people would say, well, there will be other episodes of intimacy which are not covered by those brachot. Those brachot have nothing to do, because the rules of brachot, as we know, are that a person recites a bracha, let's say in the realm, it's not exactly the same, but it's related. When we talk about eating food, for example, those aren't birkat hamitzvah, those are birkat hanenin. But you'll understand what I'm trying to dramatize. If I make a bracha before I eat something, so it covers that food that I'm eating, I eat it. Then if I get up and I leave, I go away, I leave the place, I come back 3 hours later, and I'm going to eat the same food, that bracha doesn't cover what I ate before, let's say what I'm about to eat now. Because there are rules, there's a concept, a person is mesiach dat. If they are distracted, they lose focus and they turn their attention to something else. If they end this session of eating, so the effect of the bracha they recited, it dissipates, it expires, the bracha expires, and there has to be a new one. So the Chassam Sofer says, you're going to say to me that if the couple isn't physically intimate for some period of time, when they come back to it, there should be a new bracha. He says, why do you see it as an interruption? Why do you see it as an interruption? The Torah doesn't agree to that. The Torah doesn't agree to that. So you'll say, well, there was hesech hadat, because in the interim, people went to work, or they went to the supermarket. They drove around in their cars. They paid their taxes. They used the ATM. They went shopping. They took out the garbage. They attended to the recycling. Oh, there was a load of dishes to be filled. The Chassam Sofer says, why are any of those things incompatible with being intimate? Why are any of those things, why do they need to be seen as an interruption of the experience of intimacy that was initiated the night of the wedding? The Chassam Sofer says, I don't agree with that. And in this formulation, in his summary lies all of the secret of Jewish marriage. Chassam Sofer says an episode of intimacy is initiated on the night of the wedding, right after the chuppah. A couple is intimate. And according to the Torah, the gift of the Torah, says the Chassam Sofer, the gift of the Torah is to give us the means, the tools, the opportunity and invitation to realize this potential. Nobody else can offer this. No other system, no other hashkafa lahavdil, no other religion lahavdil, nobody else in the universe. There's no other culture, there's no other group. People can say a lot of pretty words. It's all sheker v'chazav, because the unhappiness out there in the rest of the world, the unhappiness in this area specifically, the unhappiness in everything. Look around you at Western civilization, at Eastern civilization. Look at anywhere you want. People are miserable. They're miserable because without Torah, people can't be happy. Their neshamas are starving to death. They're dying. And they should know through the application of their logic, through their creativity, all of it's propaganda of their taivas. It's all propaganda of their taivas. They don't do there's no logical thinking in this area. They wouldn't be capable of being able to understand kedusha, the godliness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu implanted into the institution, the potential of marriage. So if anybody else promises you anything like that, don't be fooled. But the Chassam Sofer says, what the Torah offers us is the ability to initiate a period of an episode of intimacy with our spouse, and we have the potential for that period of intimacy, that episode of intimacy, to continue through a lifetime. Even as a person is loading the dishes or they're using the ATM, this is part of the ongoing process of intimacy. Now, I'm using clean language. I'm overdoing it for effect. But that's not really the correct formulation. What the Chassam Sofer says is it's the ability that the intimacy, he doesn't say the intimacy, the sexual intimacy, the physical intimacy, that kind of sensual experience of a husband and wife being bonded together, that's the fullness of the formulation. We'll see the Vilna Gaon will say something along these same lines. He comes at it from a different angle, but what he says is shockingly holy and beautiful. To encounter some of these ideas, if you're not tempted to cry, so you're not really understanding what they're talking about, and like the drama, the beauty. And I don't think you realize what, in contradistinction to what's out there in the rest of the world. So the Chassam Sofer says, what the Torah offers us is the potential, the promise, the opportunity. It's not guaranteed. We have to work for it. We have to work for it. But if we do, what we have is the opportunity for a lifetime of intimacy between a husband and wife. What I don't want you to think is that what that means is that it's easy and that it's constant fun. That's not true. That's not true at all. Because as we're going to see in this course, the ongoing experience, the process of being married, requires constant exertion, requires constant hard work and effort. And whatever amount of hard work you think you're putting in and you think that's good, it's not enough. We're going to address that point. I'm going to tell you a little humorous anecdote, my experience over the years since I've written these books about hard work, what people tell me. But what I'll tell you is that whatever the amount of hard work we think we're doing, it's not enough. However much we have to exercise self-control, we have to transcend every natural instinct we possess. Okay, that's part of it. The payoff, though, is the potential. We have the ability to actualize, to realize that potential, to realize that promise of a constant, uninterrupted, sustained, never broken experience of intimacy with our spouse. I think that's worth any amount of effort. So that represents the introduction to this course. And I hope that even as at times I'm talking to you about mechanics, technical things, details, rules, all kinds of considerations, and you think there's a lot of details, there's a lot of hard work, this is kind of annoying. Even as we're talking about that, I'd like you to understand that all of this is taking place under the umbrella of that idea that I just shared with you, that all of these ideas, all of them contribute when you put them all together and you actually live them. No corner cutting. Don't think, God forbid, that you're smarter than the system, that the halacha tells us to do something, the Torah exhorts us, admonishes us to behave in certain ways, and we think, well, I know better. That's a little outmoded, or it's a little extreme. I don't have to do the whole thing. You have to. Because the goal is that sustained, unwavering, unbroken, continuous for a lifetime experience of intimacy. It doesn't mean it's always fun. It doesn't mean that it's always, it's never easy. It's never easy. But the payoff in this world, even in that sense of that sustained period of intimacy, and the payoff in the world to come, an eternity of reward for it, is, I can't think of anything that would be worth more than those kind of payouts that the Torah promises us. Okay, now with that in mind, let's actually plunge into some of the nitty-gritty details. Somebody once said, I think it's a perfect formulation of what we're talking about. They said that marriage is the greatest educational institution on earth. That's really what the Torah is trying to communicate to us. Marriage is the greatest educational institution on earth. Our job, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to attend an educational institution. He wants us to learn certain things. He wants us to learn a lot. So we could apply, God forbid, to an Ivy League school. That would be the worst thing that a human being could do, to put themselves at the mercy of people out there in the world and to hear what they have to, nothing like that, nothing. So what would be the greatest educational institution? It's marriage. It's marriage. And the Torah looks at marriage exactly that way. The point of being married, the point of this greatest educational institution, the point of the institution of marriage is to produce the absolute best version of ourselves that we can be. The Torah wants to make you, the you that results from a lifetime of work, the Torah wants you to be the very best version of you that you can be. Because marriage has the ability to insinuate itself, marital considerations, insinuate themselves into every nook and cranny, every aspect of your life in a way that nothing else can, in a way that nothing else can. I have many times over the years, my first marriage book, Table for Two, which later on became Setting a Table for Two. So I have had the experience to attend many weddings, ufrov, sheva brachos, like all kinds of events like that. And people, I'll be sitting there and I'll hear someone quote something from the book. I always enjoy that experience. I have to tell you, I love that. One of the things that I've heard many times is this. I talk about in the book that before a person gets married, and like I said, I've been sitting places, sitting there quietly, and I think, oh, I'm so happy this person just said this. What I wrote was that before you get married, the kind of orange juice that you like, no one cares. The universe doesn't care. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't particularly care. If you like the home style that's got the little bits of pulp in it, if you like the clear orange juice, if you like the one that has lots and lots of pulp in it, nobody cares. It is in the ultimate, in the eyes of the Torah, it's a neutral kind of consideration. So you have your personal preference of what you like. Okay, whatever. That is halachically and hashkafically neutral. At the point that you get married, and let's suppose that you're learning in Eretz Yisrael on a kollel family's budget, and you can afford only, by the way, it's not so clear that the drink orange juice is even healthy. So that would be its own course, and we don't want to go into that. A lot of sugar in a very concentrated form. I wrote the mashal at a time in my life when I wasn't so educated about nutrition. But let's just humor me for a moment. But let's suppose that a family can afford one carton of orange juice. So suddenly, when you're standing in the aisle in the supermarket and you're about to buy the orange juice, so substitute some healthy food in place of the orange juice. But you understand the point that I'm trying to make. As you're standing there, you think to yourself, gosh, I really like the home style. I like pulp in mine. In fact, I like tons of pulp. I love when it's like that thick and it's filled with like little pieces of crud in it. Wow, I really love that. But the fact is, at home, your spouse who's got this, doesn't like pulp, likes the clear kind of orange juice. So suddenly, as you're standing there, and imagine whatever, you use your creativity to imagine whatever kind of financial or other kind of constraints are on you, operating on you at this moment, so that you can't take care of what they want and what you want. And now you have to make a choice. Do I get what I want, or do I get what my spouse wants? So suddenly the decision that you make, you're standing in the aisle, the supermarket, and it's orange juice, for goodness sakes. Like, what does that have to do? I'm like, no, suddenly it's taken on a whole new significance. And at the moment that you put back the home style with all that pulp in it that you like, and you get the clear one, you say, because this is what my spouse wants. So that's huge. That's really, really huge. In the book, I have a whole bunch of other examples of things which probably are a little bit less unhealthy. But in all of these things, what happens is that there's a strange kind of alchemy, a magic. Marriage, once you enter into a marital relationship, everything you do, you can't find anything, nothing. It's shocking. You can't find anything. How you allocate your time during the day, the choices you make about everything. Suddenly there's another person who is involved, who is impacted directly by what you do. And the decisions that you make take on a whole new kind of cosmic significance in terms of the impact on my spouse. I have to take them into account. That kind of work, and it is work. That is work. It changes everything. And marriage, in that sense, and in many others, is the greatest educational institution on the face of this planet. One of my rebbeim, when I was a kid, used to say this. He used to say that rocks in the stream, if you go down to like a brook and you pick up some rocks, you go down to the river, you fish out a couple of rocks, and what you'll find is that the rocks in the stream are very smooth. They're like oval shaped, and you feel them, and they're smooth. They're smooth to the touch. Why are they? So people will say incorrectly, they'll say, well, you have the water running over these rocks for so long, it smooths them down. But my Rebbe, when I was a kid, said to us, that's not true. The reason that they're smooth is that the water, as the water is moving, it carries the rocks along, it moves them, and they bump up against each other. And the constant friction of the rocks against each other, as the rocks are always bumping up against each other over the course of time, it smooths the rock down. It's not the water that smooths the rock directly. It's the rock against the rock. As they bump up against each other, it smooths that process, that friction between them smooths everybody down. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, my Rebbe concluded. He said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to be smooth. And the only way to do that in a real way, in other words, we could have certain kind of superficial, surface, illusory smoothness. People can develop a certain kind of etiquette. When people interact in the workplace or in social contexts, they learn how to behave to be smooth. It's external. It's an overlay. Because for the few minutes that they're interacting with another human being, they can put all kinds of artifice, they can simulate all kinds of things, but it's not real and it doesn't reach deep down into the neshama of the person. And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants is the neshama of the person to be smooth. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts us together in this ultimate, it's the ultimate in claustrophobia, it's the ultimate in constricting relationships where people are right up against each other. For that reason, the Mefarshim, by the way, when they're discussing Hashkafa, will say, now we'll leave aside all of the psychological, the social, all of the kind of, wicked considerations that are out there in the world. But this question comes up from the Mefarshim. They'll say, why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow that marriage as an institution could be contracted by two members of the same gender? Two men, why can't they marry? Two women, why can't they marry? Let's be unequivocally clear, they can't marry. In the eyes of the Torah, such a union is forbidden. There's no value to it. The Torah doesn't recognize the legitimacy of such a union, not a thing. Marriage is defined by the Torah as the union of a man and a woman. That's all there is. But the question is why? Why not? Why couldn't two men marry each other? Why couldn't two women marry each other? And the answer, I bet you can come up with, is that men and women, two men, if they were married to each other, they kind of look at the world the same way. Men have certain instincts that they share in common with other men, certain perspectives, certain attitudes. Two women, same thing. They look at the world. It would be much easier for two men, be much easier for two women to be married to each other. As repugnant as that, inspires that feeling within us, and it should fill us with revulsion as we see what the world has done with the even the consideration of this concept. But the fact is, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did was to take a man and a woman who are endowed with radically different ways of looking at the world. The teva of a man and the teva of a woman. Now, I couldn't identify for you what that teva. I couldn't define clearly what that teva is exactly, and I wouldn't want to, because I don't want to, get myself into some kind of quagmire of things people say. Well, I know, I'm a woman. I'm not exactly. That doesn't matter. Whatever that is, and there are books written out there in the world, and I direct you to, you can find them. They talk about what the teva of a woman is, what the teva of a man is. Each of those, a man, has certain strengths and advantages and certain weaknesses and deficiencies. A woman has certain strengths and advantages. and certain weaknesses and deficiencies. And when the two of them are put together with crazy glue, and they're constrained, they're put into a prison cell of marriage, they have to bump up against each other. And they have to look at the same situation, confront the same kind of things in life, and they say, "Oh my gosh!" And it's like, wait, it's like, "Oh my gosh, we think wildly differently, and we have to try to figure out how to get along with each other and how to work collaboratively for the success of this marriage, this relationship, and for the family, the home, the Torah home that we're going to produce." It's in the nonstop process of those two people bumping up against each other that they become smooth. And the Torah wants us to be smooth. It's in that sense that we can understand a comment from the Gra. The Vilna Gaon wrote a sefer. He wrote a whole bunch of things called the Even Shlema. The Even Shlema is a Mutzer work. And this is how he starts out. This is how he starts out. Kol avodat Hashem talui b'tikun hamidot. All of our service of God, our avodat Hashem, all of our service of God is talui, is dependent. It's a function of tikun hamidot, correcting our midos. All of our ability to serve God, everything that we do, kol avodat Hashem, everything, the entirety of our lives, we're in this world to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is dependent on the process of tikkun hamidot, of correcting ourselves, refining our character, ennobling our souls, correcting our midos. He says this, he says, Ikar chiyut adam hu lehitchazek tamid b'shvirat hamidot. Ikar chiyut adam. The main point of a person's life is to be mitchazek tamid, to strengthen ourselves always, b'shvirat hamidot, in the breaking of our midot. Ve'im lav, if we're not involved in that process, lama lo chayim. What's the point of being alive? What's the point of being alive? If we're not being mitchazek tamid b'shvirat hamidot, if we're not strengthening ourselves, if we're not exerting ourselves, if we're not transcending ourselves, tamid, always, every second of our existence, if we're not being mitchazek, we're not exerting ourselves always to break our midot, to break our bad midos, like what's the point? Why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu bother to put us into this world so we can eat chicken? We can eat chicken. We say, "Oh, we'll eat chicken, but we'll eat kogel." That's very kadosh. We'll sing zmiros. Well, no. We're in this world to break our bad midos. We're born with certain bad midos, with instincts of selfishness, of self-interest. We have this pursuit of pleasure, of ease and comfort. We want to be complacent. We want to coast. We want to be catered to. We want to take what we want. We want to refrain. We want to not do what we don't want to do. All those things. So our job in this world is to break all of those instincts and to produce from ourselves the most noble, the most refined, the most elegant, not elegant in a superficial way, but dignified in a Torah way, version of ourselves that we can possibly be. To that end, there can be no greater institution, than the institution of marriage. The same HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who designed us, who created us, and who knew that the Gra was going to write, because the Gra didn't make that up. The Gra is understanding very well HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intention in creating all of creation and creating humankind. The Gra studied Kol HaTorah Kula, all of the written, all of the oral, all of the revealed, all of the hidden. He knew everything. And when the Gra sat down to write his book, his Mutzer book, he said this. What's it all about? It's all about tikkun hamidot, correcting ourselves, elevating, refining our characters. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the universe and created humankind. It was all for that. And to that end, Hashem said, if that's what I want to happen, if that's the process, I want every person to be involved in that process of refining themselves, of breaking their bad midos. So what do I do? So the very next step is to create the institution of marriage and to throw a man and a woman up against each other and to say, now you have to get along. Now, in the writing of my books and in the updating of my books, I updated both books about 5 years ago. The books came out about 30 years ago. I was very young at the time. And Chas Hashem, the books were pretty good for all of that. I've had a lot of time to make mistakes, to do a lot of learning, to see a lot of the world, to interact with a lot of people, counsel couples, speak with people, speak with professionals, learn under Talmidei Chachamim, live life. With all of that, some years ago, I revised the books. Thank God. I didn't have to revise more. I had really more to just enhance them, to expand them, to add to them, because the core, the framework, Chas Hashem, was pretty good. In the course of all of these processes, either writing or reviewing and revising, or of updating, or of speaking with marriage counselors, or doing counseling myself, interacting with couples, etc. In all of these things, I've had occasion to speak with marriage counselors, in the outside secular community and in the frum community as well. And what I've heard, now, I had more or less concluded this based on my own research, my own reading. I've spent a lot of my time over the years looking to see what the secular world has to offer, and it's not a lot. And whatever it is, it's really not good. It's not good. But I've spoken with people out there who are considered to be experts in the field, and I've spoken with marriage counselors who cater to service the frum community, And what I've heard across the board from all of them is this, that marriage counseling, couples counseling, is almost always a disappointing failure. That's the chiddush that they've given me. It really wasn't a chiddush to me. What they say is that couples counseling, when couples come for marriage counseling, it's almost always a failure. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. See if that intuitively, if that makes sense to you. Let's say you've got a practitioner who's pretty capable, pretty talented. They even have some Torah ideas. Let's say it's a frum marriage counselor, it's a frum couple, things like that. So why would it not be successful? Just last week, in anticipation, I think it must have been Chol HaMoed, I spoke with a friend of mine who is a marriage counselor. And we were discussing some of these ideas, and he said the same thing. He said, yeah, he says, it's always disappointing. It's always disappointing. Now, in psychology, there is a phenomenon. I studied this many years ago, and now I'm blanking. I think it's called diffusion of responsibility, which is that if you have somebody doing work, one person's doing work, and they're pretty productive, and then you form a team. Let's say you've got 10 people. When they were working, each of them independently, they were reasonably productive. They were able to do a lot of good work. When you put those 10 people together in a team, you think, well, it should be that I'll get at least what I was getting before, the arithmetic sum of those 10 people working. It might even be with a collaborative kind of effort that'll be more than just the sum of what they were doing. There'll be a certain synergy, and they'll produce much more. The Torah, in fact, talks about that. The Torah, if you remember in Vayikra, when it's talking about at the beginning of the Tochacha, it says, one person will chase, one of you, when the Torah nation is behaving like a Torah nation, one of you will chase a lot, 10 of you will chase many more. You say, 100 will chase, and it looks like it's like a parabolic. It's like, it's almost like the square of things. So you say, that makes sense. But industrial psychologists, for example, have found that when you put 10 productive people together, the productivity plummets. And what you get is the amount of work that before maybe 3 or 4 people we're producing. What happens? Why is that? So they talk about diffusion of responsibility. Nobody thinks to themselves like, well, I have to do it, because they think, well, there's a team. A lot of people, they're all going to do it. So suddenly now being part of a team, being part of a collaborative effort, each person lightens up what they do. Now, my friend didn't mention that. I'm just trying to give you some kind of a visceral appreciation of this. But what he said to me was exactly, he said, like, I've never seen couples counseling to be really all that productive. It just doesn't work. And that's why what I would say to you is this: whether you're in a relationship now, or if you're not, Emir Hashem, soon you will be, the way you look at it is it's not a collaborative effort. It's up to you and you alone. HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts you into a situation, and what he says is, it's up to you. Don't be fooled. And don't tie anything that you do, up with what another person, your expectations or your demands of what that other person is going to do. That other person happens to be called your spouse. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Everything is up to you and you alone. And to that end, I will share a quote with you. I've collected these over the decades. Some of them are very powerful. This is a fellow, his name is Wilfred Peterson. He wrote this a long time ago, not a Jewish person. He wrote an essay called The Art of Marriage. It's magnificent, this quote. He says, the secret to a good marriage is not to find the perfect partner, but rather to be the perfect partner. And that's it. That's it. That's the secret. That's the Torah principle on which everything is. You think about the zechus. I will, in the course of this course, I'm going to quote people every once in a while. I quoted someone earlier. I don't remember the name. Channing Pollock. I do remember the name. It's right here. Marriage is the greatest educational institution on earth. What is a chus? This person was able to anticipate, was able to understand this Torah principle. Shocking. Marriage is the greatest educational institution on earth. And we always, we're careful to give respect to say, B'Shem Omro. Here, Wilfred Peterson said, the secret to a good marriage is not to find the perfect partner. So many people think, sadly, tragically, that their success in life is if they find that right person. That's not true. Not true at all. The secret to a good marriage is not to find the perfect partner, but rather to be the perfect partner. And in that, and what we'll see in this course, we're at the end of this first session. But what we're going to see is that what we're going to discuss, the ideas I'm going to share with you, are all premised on this notion that the power lies with you. You possess the power to take a relationship and to bring it to any heights that you choose. And if you'll say, well, I don't know if that's true. Sometimes we end up with people who are difficult, annoying, or that. I say that without qualification. We're going to actually have to spend some time with that, unpacking the ideas in that, because there are difficult people in the world. And we'll talk about that, and we will perhaps find some kind of qualification, slight, nowhere near as sweeping as you imagine it will be. But that is going to be the premise of this course, is that the power, you possess that power. To create a relationship, you can take it to the heights of Torah success. And what the Torah tells us is the potential is there if we play our cards right, and we commit ourselves to doing enough work, if we exert ourselves, and we're right, if we're prepared to exert ourselves, and if we're prepared to transcend ourselves, we have the ability. It's unbelievable. Be'ezras Hashem, we have the ability to create a marriage that will be, as the Chassam Sofer says, an unwavering, an unending, unbroken, sustained, continuous, lifelong experience of intimacy between us and our spouses. Okay. Emir Hashem, see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.